Rolling right along, I want to welcome to the stage my colleague Mike Wagner from the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, also an affiliate of the Political Science Department in the ERC. Mike.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. This is one of the best events that happens after elections. It's so great to have another opportunity to spend some time with you all. I have the great pleasure of introducing Franco Ordoñez, White House Correspondent, National Public Radio, and he'll be behind a podium, and the table here has a drape, but he has amazing NPR socks. So make it a point to notice those before you go. He has been there since 2019. White House correspondent, has covered politics in Cuba, Colombia, Haiti, doing double duty now, covering the outgoing administration. A recent story you might have heard related to the Biden administration and disaster relief, and then also a story about questions that are being asked about one of President-elect Trump's nominees. I think it was for Secretary of Defense. And so just in the last few days, major work covering two presidential administrations at once, and coming here to share his impressions of what he has learned along the campaign trail. After he spends some time sharing some of that with you, I'll ask him a couple of questions, and then as you all are familiar with now, you can write questions down on note cards, and we'll get to as many as we can. I'll also, it'll look like I'm looking at my phone, but what I'm really doing is looking at Zoom. If there people on Zoom have questions they want asked as well, we'll bring those into the mix for this conversation. And just a note that after this session is done, there is a wonderful poster session right outside with a number of wonderful students who put together really great research related to elections. So make sure to check that out as well. But it's our great pleasure to welcome NPR White House correspondent Franco Ordoñez.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Barry. Thank you to the Election Research Center. It's really, really great to be here. It's really just cool to do these kind of things, to do this right now. It has been so busy. It's been so crazy the last few months, the last couple years. And it's really a chance for me to process, because it's really like go, 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 go. And being here with all these speakers has been great. And I don't know about you, but just listening to Bernard was just like blowing my mind. I mean, wow. I mean, I've personally have done a lot of reporting on Latinos and Latino Americans and Latino American voters, and I've reported on kind of that move from to the Republican side, and then to see it kind of that data kind of backing all that up, it was really good. So, bravo, Bernard. I really feel just like that scenario, that this is an election we are going to be talking about for years and years and years and years. We've seen that with the earlier discussions, and we're going to continue to do that. I'm sure I'll give you my thoughts on the analysis as well in the Q&A, but let's go to the campaign trail for a little bit. I'm going to do something a little bit different. As you can already see, there's no data on that. This is a picture at the Reagan National Airport in D.C. Because for me, this was an election that went from basically like Groundhog Day to just chaos. Do you remember? I mean, in the beginning, in the fall, in the spring, everybody's like, no one liked either candidate. The polls show dissatisfaction with both Biden, both Trump. No one was really happy. And NPR, we did a lot of stories about that. And that was kind of like the conversation until June 27th. Bam. Yeah. That was the day when all of our lives started to change, right? Now, I have been covering Biden. I covered Trump, and then I covered Biden for 3 years. I was in the Oval Office plenty of times watching him meet with foreign leaders, meet with domestic leaders, meet with the Speaker of the House. And look, he's getting older. You could see him slow down. His voice would slow down. His stutter, which he grew up with, would become more pronounced. He would whisper and whisper and whisper, and you're like, come on, dude, speak up. But at the same time, Biden would step up to the moment. Remember the 2024 State of the Union address where he sparred with the Republicans? I mean, he was there. I mean, he was feisty. And I personally, before this, and I would tell people, I think I said on the radio, that I expected that he would do that in this debate. He knew it was coming. He planned for this debate. His campaign pushed for it to be earlier. Remember, these typically are in September. Moved it to June, because he needed it to be, his campaign needed it to be not about a referendum on his 3 years or 4 years, but on a choice election. He always talked about it's not about God Almighty, it's about the alternative. It's about the alternative. And he wanted to change that conversation. Well, that didn't work because I thought he was going to come out, blazing. But really, I think from the very first moment, he came out, I thought he would come out, run over to Trump, maybe shake his hand, big shoulders. He'd give you that big, hey man, how he does that, hey man. But he didn't. He came out, he took these very short strides. He kind of shuffled a bit. His arms were to his side. He looked tired. He just looked tired. And I would say it went downhill from there, right? 2 weeks later. And the timing of that was very critical because it obviously sent, the Democratic Party into a tailspin. 2 weeks later, this op-ed comes out. George Clooney, one of his biggest supporters, writes that he should step down. And he says, what does he say? What did he say? He said, this is not, he just had a campaign with support. And he said, this is not the oh man, what did I say? Oh, I lost my spot. Sorry. Oh yeah, he wrote, this was not the Joe big effing deal of 2020. It wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2020, not the Joe effing deal of 2010. Remember when Obamacare came out? He wasn't even the Joe Biden of 2010. This really took a lot of attention. What else happened? That same day, July 10th, remember this? Nancy Pelosi goes on Joe Scarborough, and she says that it's up to the president to decide if he's going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision soon because time is running short. Reasonable, right? Very reasonable thing to say. Well, Biden already did make a decision. 2 days earlier, he said a very strongly worded letter saying, I'm sticking with it. He said, I am firmly committed to staying in this race. I can assure you Pelosi got that letter. If things could not get worse, 3 days later, obviously, a man outside of Butler, Pennsylvania, takes a shot at former President Donald Trump. He goes down. No one knows what's going to happen. He gets back up. Blood is coming down his face. And he says, wait a minute, goes to the podium and says, fight, fight, fight. Iconic image, we saw it from very earlier, becomes the rallying cry of his campaign for the rest of the year. This, immediately as he goes into the RNC, 2 days later, July 15th, Republicans are on a roll. It is almost like a religious fervor in that room. Bear, you were there? I mean, it was kind of amazing, the energy in that room. I have never heard a packed arena get so quiet as when Trump was talking about that assassination attempt. He said, I am not supposed to be here. I'm up in not the rafters, but I'm pretty high up in these TV areas. And you could just hear the people on the side going, yes, you should. And it was something. Let me just say, this is us, Sue Davis, Mara Eliason, and myself, the last day, talking about there was a feeling of inevitability in the room. You guys know the feeling or the relationship that Trump world has with the press. It's not the greatest one, right? There's some friction there. Let's just be honest. They were so nice to us. So nice. I mean, because they had a story to tell. They were very confident. And that was kind of this conversation. But I would argue, I wasn't supposed to show that yet. Let's go back. That was not the craziest moment of this campaign, in my humble opinion. What was the craziest moment? This. This is me, still in Milwaukee, heading, I'm going home. I'm sending a selfie to my kids. I'm telling them I'm going home. I'm going to be back. I send proof that I'm going back with a picture. I talk about the gifts or the candy that I'm bringing back. I'm tired. I'm really excited to go home. And flight attendants are saying, put your devices away. I'm like, sure, no problem. I do keep it on for a little bit longer, and which I tend to do. And then this comes across. The tweet, the darn tweet. He said, Biden says he's dropping out. I am freaking out in my seat. I have some colleagues over, and I'm like, Biden just dropped out. I mean, everybody else is kind of looking, picking out what movie they want to watch. And I'm like, I want to be with you, but it was just madness. I go home, I go back to DC. I don't go home as I wanted to. I go straight to the headquarters. Within 5 minutes, my editors are sending me messages. When are you going to arrive? I get to HQ, headquarters at NPR. I go up the elevator. I get out of the elevator. I'm taking my roller bag to my suitcase, my desk. I see my desk editor there, and he's like, come on. I'm like, oh, man. And I have to go straight to the studio. I go straight to the studio. Within 5 minutes, I'm trying to explain what this means for Trump, how this changes. So what does it mean? What did it mean? It was, it was crazy. What happens next? Biden pretty much immediately endorses Harris. And what happens? It's like a rocket ship. She just flies, right? Money, support, money, polls, money. I mean, it is. She then has great debate. She is on rise. There's so much excitement for Harris. I start going, I'm like, okay, this is a new world. This is totally different. I need to get out on the trail with her. I go on trips with her. Great debate. I go on a trip with her. She goes to Georgia, Flint, Michigan, Detroit. The energy is just emphatic, or just really high. And I'm not the only one who's pretty excited. Anybody recognize who that is? That is Annie Leibovitz, famed photographer, who is also must be pretty excited about this. And that's me taking a photo of Annie Leibovitz, who's taking a photo of Kamala Harris. The copyright is mine, by the way. Just kidding. But I would also like to know that it is a cell phone that she's using. And I thought that was pretty funny too. She also had a good camera, but anyways, I thought it was funny. Anyways, it was just so massive. Everything, I think maybe it was Bernard was talking about the events that Biden has and the kind of the drive-in. Biden events were kind of status quo. You kind of knew what he was going to say. Harris's events were pretty exciting. You had just, she had funk and rhythm. She had DJs. She had celebrities. Us reporters, we started kind of comparing playlists. She had funk and rhythm and blues. Trump had kind of a mix of gospel and Broadway. Yes, some rock, Kid Rock, but like Phantom of the Opera, Dolly Parton, and of course, YMCA and the Village People, right? It was really it was like an earthquake, I think Lynn said earlier. It was like a tectonic shift in this campaign, to the point me and my colleagues were kind of talking about whether people even remembered the shooting. Not literally, but the conversation had just completely changed. And it was a tough time for Trump too. I mean, for 5 or 6 weeks, he could not deal with this. He kept talking about Biden. He couldn't adjust and counter. But as we've kind of learned, Harris kind of hit a ceiling. As Barry said, she was able to stop the bleeding for Democrats, but wasn't really able to get past that. She wasn't able to break kind of a barrier. A lot of strategists told me like this 50% barrier in national polls that Democrats needed to kind of get past. And I can also tell you that Republicans were feeling pretty darn confident about 3 weeks out. because usually at that point, most of the Republican presidential candidates were behind. And in the polls, Trump was about dead. Even it became a real race. They're taking shots at each other. Obviously, Madison Square Garden, the comedian talked about of Puerto Rico and the island, floating island of garbage. All of a sudden, Harris got some new momentum there. I had a Republican strategist call me. He's like, you know what I said last week? Maybe not. Biden then says what he said about supporters and very confusing thing, garbage. Trump obviously milked it for what it is. That's him wearing the garbage vest, the green reflective vest. It was quite a busy time. I can tell you, I went Florida, Las Vegas, Denver, Miami, Georgia, back to Las Vegas, back to Florida, Milwaukee, Green Bay, Detroit, Flint, Michigan, Salem, Virginia. I was actually pretty thankful that my editors let me go home to my kids, Milwaukee, to go for Halloween. And I actually saw, can anybody pick out that person in the back left? Anyone? Oh, come on, guys. Where's my little pointer? Mara Lyson. That's Mara Lyson, which she actually lives by. So we went and saw her. But it was crazy. So many rallies. I had to learn how to sweet talk TSA agents. I really learned how much I hate sitting in a middle seat. And I learned also how much work I could do and how many mistakes I could make on such little sleep, such as this. Tamara Keith spoke to you guys last year, right? This is me calling Tamara Keith with a pocket dial. I'll use pocket dial in my at 4 a.m. because I'm going from Grand Rapids to Palm Beach at 4 a.m. And I'm calling her, waking her up before Election Day. And she's got to get on the radio too. But she is such a sweetheart. Next day, Trump is elected. And let me wrap this up. I think, the mood in the room was pretty, at first, pretty low key. But once North Carolina was called, people started getting really excited. In a way, 4 years ago when Arizona was called for Biden, and there was definitely a feeling like of energy shifting, I kind of felt like North Carolina was that in West Palm Beach. The drinks really started to flow. 2 a.m., Trump came out. And there was another thing that I realized. I was kind of looking at this in bite-sized pieces. I kept telling my family, my friends, I just got to get to Tuesday. On Tuesday, or actually Wednesday, at 2 a.m., I realized I'm crazy. This is not finishing. This is just starting. And that's what we've been doing ever since, is covering the transition. And yes, Matt Gaetz is there. This slideshow was done before. So I'm going to end it there. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Here we go. Great. Thank you so much for that really engaging trip down campaign lane. It just seems so glamorous getting up at 4 a.m. and getting...
Yeah.
So one question I have, and again, don't forget, if you have questions, you can write them down, and an army of outstanding graduate students will shuffle them on up here so we can include them in our conversation. But you've heard a bunch of explanations now from political scientists this morning, from Barry and Lynn and Bernard and Brian, about things they've observed empirically. Did any of those things resonate with what you saw on the ground at these rallies, or when you talked to staffers behind the scenes, or anything else in your own deep and original reporting? What rings true? What didn't you see from what we've heard this morning about the systematic explanations for what's going on here?
Yeah, certainly. We heard a lot about the economy. That was something over and over again, people feeling about inflation. And I'm not talking about at rallies. I'm talking about meeting people at grocery stores, out on the street. Who are you voting for? Why are you voting for that person? What are you feeling about the election? And often it was the economy. It was inflation. My dollar is not going far enough. You can explain the data to them that actually inflation has lowered. You can say that the economy is doing really well because you have all these numbers, and they're like, look, my income has not gone up. as much as my grocery bill has gone up. And that was something that was repeated to me very often. Bernard was talking about Latino voters. And this was something that really stunned me because I went to Las Vegas in 2016. I went in 2020, and I did it several times this past year to talk to Latino voters. And I can tell you anecdotally what Bernard said is very true. It was very... I found Latino voters supporting Republicans it was hard in 2016. 2020, 3, 4, I did it, but, it was more Latino voters supporting Democrats in 2020. This is anecdotal. Just let me be very clear. 2024, it was a piece of cake. I mean, I was blown away by how easy it was to find a Latino voter very openly would tell me, yes, I'm supporting Trump. But what about everything that he said? What about all the rhetoric? Sometimes it was like, well, we think it's a lot more bark than bite. But always, it came down to, not always, but very often it came down to the economy and their grocery bills. Some of them, it was about immigration and security. Some of them wanted greater security. And some of these conversations were in Spanish with people who could not speak English. You just note, newer arrivals, as Bernard was saying, people who've been here a long time who have family who are undocumented immigrants. It was pretty fascinating.
So one question that I think is kind of a natural follow-up to some of what you were saying is kind of asking about whether it's real facts on the ground or messaging that might have been driving some of the voters' behavior that you're talking with. And so the question here is, how much do you agree with the sentiment that Biden and Harris failed to effectively address or counter dissatisfaction with the administration? Biden was an unpopular incumbent. A lot of folks have talked about how, when Harris started, she started at a pretty strong deficit. How much of this is failing to counter that narrative?
Look, I think Harris ran a very good campaign. I'm not kidding about the rocket ship that she had those first few months. I think any politician would gladly take those first 2 months that she had and use that to launch herself on. But Barry was talking about that great poll about the dissatisfaction that people feel. They're just not happy. They are just not satisfied. They do not feel the country is moving in the right place. You could feel that very much. And this is a question, I think this is probably more a question for the political scientists, but when I talk to people, I think it would have been very hard for any Democratic candidate at this point, considering how people were not happy with how the party was leading the country, particularly on the economy, but also on immigration. You had Democratic governors earlier in the year really going after Biden, saying you have to do something about the border. Democratic governors. It was pretty profound.
A few different folks asked a version of this question, and so I'm going to try to craft it in a way that's consistent with what the kind of the meat of the argument is. And so the question is sort of like this. President-elect Trump says lots of things that are not true, lots of things that are plainly racist, lots of things that are plainly sexist, makes a lot of promises that he does not follow through on almost immediately. How do you assess the job of or how well do you think the news media covered him in comparison to how comparatively they treated Biden, with people were asking here with respect to his age, Harris with respect to her qualifications for the office? What's the comparative nature of covering someone who's so different than everybody else who's ever run for president?
Yeah, no, this is the kind of question that gets me in trouble.
You're welcome.
I do feel some of this is I don't know. This is a tough thing to say. I'll ask a question. How many folks prefer MSNBC to Fox? MSNBC's people, okay? Now, let's look how many of those same people Raise how many of them watch Fox and trust Fox? Trust Fox. Very few hands. So there's a lot of anger about, my point is there's a lot of anger about the press not doing more, of not, I think, was it Lynn who was saying that, like, not changing people's minds. And I'm not sure, it is so hard to change people's minds. As I would say, the people who raise their hands of watching MSNBC, but not, and I could, you could do that CNN anywhere. I think you just stop listening to those outlets. You stop trusting them. And I think that's happened of these other outlets. And I do think there is a challenge of going to meeting people somewhere and reaching them and finding things in common. And I think that is a challenge that we in the media also face. We need to find that place. And I think you're seeing that in some sense. I mean, you saw Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski go to Mar-a-Lago and talk to Trump. Now, is that a business decision? Is that going against loyalty? Is that a turncoat? What, I don't know. But I think it is. There needs to be, or I think there's a recognition that, look, there's an anger among the American people, and I think there's going to be a lot of looking inside that the press and all of us have to do. I certainly am.
So let me ask a quick follow-up. So you covered the first movie. Now there's the sequel of a second President Trump presidency. What do you think news organizations, especially White House correspondents, should do differently, if anything, this time?
These are questions for more like David Folkenflik. But I'll try. What should we do? I am a White House correspondent. What should we do differently? I mean, we have to tell the truth. We have to tell the truth of what's going on. We have to call a spade a spade. We have to, Trump lies. We have to call out the lies. Trump says something that's not true. We have to call that out. We call the political analysts that are in this room, the pollsters, and we get their opinions of what these kind of policy decisions impact. At the same time, I do think there is a calibration that the press needs to do, and I think we're learning that. Like, I think in the beginning of the first Trump administration, like anything that happened, it was like a 10 on the Richter. This is not original thought for me, like a 10 on the Richter scale. No matter what happened, it was like 10, 10, 10. This is crazy, 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 crazy. When some of the things, if it was done by someone else, maybe it would have been a 2 or a 3. And I just think there needs to be some calibration on some of those things. There's some coverage now of like, let's take mass deportations, okay? He has said some very scary things about mass deportations that would, if carried out, would absolutely break up families, right? Okay. Well, the reality is it would be very hard to do those things. There's just not the resources to do those. I'm not saying people shouldn't be nervous at all. But I'm saying let's just douse some facts in there. It would cost billions of dollars to deport 1 million people each year. They do not have the manpower to do that. And I would also argue that Trump knows this. Some of this is political speak. If you listen to his speeches carefully, largest mass deportation in American history. For months he was saying that, right? The last week he started saying largest mass deportation of criminals. He started adding that word at the end. That's a different universe. I'm not saying still not a big deal. We all saw what happened when the zero tolerance policy happened. There was a massive civil outcry, and also what happened? The policy changed, and he pulled back. And if you start deporting 11 million people, splitting up families, I imagine the same thing will happen. And I think he knows that. Now, the people around him, I will say, some of the people around him are different. That's caveat. Sorry.
Speaking of people around him who are different, a couple of folks asked questions about the president-elect's nominations to various cabinet level or other high kind of ranking positions. And so kind of bringing some of these questions together, what are you learning in your reporting about President-elect Trump's thinking about who he's selecting and why? Is it connected, as folks in the audience want to know, to goals of Project 2025? And are there tea leaves you can read about whether his voters are satisfied with these choices? Why is he picking these folks? Is it consistent with this 2025 agenda, and are his voters on board?
I think voters, supporters of Trump, we were talking about the religious fervor in the RNC at the convention. The diehard Trump supporters will go with Trump pretty far. They really believe in him pretty far. So if he decides to go one way, they'll back him up. He has the support that he has is pretty amazing. In regards to reading the tea leaves of the picks, first and by far the most important qualification is loyalty. Several reasons. One, he wants loyalty. He's the guy. He needs to be the person who is driving the message, making the policy. No one speaks for Trump except Trump. Also, we saw what happened in the first transition. It was the first Trump transition. Chris Christie was leading the transition. He got booted out, brought in all these kind of more traditional Republicans, the generals, traditional may not be the right word, but more people from the system. And it was kind of a debacle. The idea is bring the loyalty, bring the people who are support, so you don't have the same kind of mini crises or big crises that they had during that first vote. And I think that's why you're getting so many of these cabinet members who are great people, are great close to him, excuse me. That said, these are some really unorthodox picks. Gates is out, but in Hegseth, who's a Fox News host, no military experience, a big police record just came out against him. It's going to be interesting seeing the next few how this plays out in the confirmation process. Obviously, he's talked about recess, but senators seem to be pushing back against that.
Here's another one from the audience. It's another media question, but not about the topics we've already covered. How can journalists navigate the increasingly hostile media environment that will likely be fostered by President-elect Trump's media rhetoric? Yeah,
it's going to be interesting. It's going to be hard. I'll say two things. Look, he talks about the press as enemy of the people. At rallies, it could be a little, nerve-wracking because he would point his finger at us and say in one of the last ones, he said, I wouldn't mind if you shot through the media. Some pretty rough stuff. And his supporters would turn around and start screaming. At the same time, Trump loves the press. He loves the TV cameras. He wants the TV cameras around. Now, things have evolved where the kinds of TV cameras that he wants are different. He doesn't need CNN. He doesn't need MSNBC. He doesn't need, ABC as much. He's got all these other more MAGA world type outlets that are following him, and that seems to been enough. But I'm as curious about that as before. During the first administration, it was pretty much incredible access with Trump. He always would come back on Air Force One. He would always come back and talk to us. We could talk to him. We would have off-the-record conversations. We'd have on-the-record conversations. That is very valuable to be able to talk to, the quote-unquote principal. It was very hard to do that with Biden. I think he only came back maybe one time, maybe two, on the plane. I do think things will. It's a different time. It's a different moment. So I think we'll find out.
So quick follow-up to that, because I find that really fascinating. Do you find, either in your own work or in the work you see of other White House correspondents, the way they cover President Trump and what he does on the record being affected by the things he says to you and the way he says them to you off the record?
Affect how?
So if he is calmer, less bombastic, more accurate, if he is off the record, I can't ask you to tell me how he is off the record because it's off the record. But so if his behavior is different off the record, does that influence how you deal with what he says on the record?
I mean, I think in a way, I think in some sense, I kind of explain that he is different when the camera is on or not on. So I think I think maybe we know that some of this is performative. A lot of it is performative. And I think when you recognize that there's a certain percentage of this is performative, you are able to take it less personally, take it less emotionally. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm so sorry you cover this. It must be so hard. And I'm like, this is my job. This is what I do. I don't take things personally or try not to take things personally. In that sense, I guess, I think Trump says he's not a politician. His supporters think he's not a politician, but he's a politician. He's been doing this. He's been leading this party for over a decade. The guy is a politician, and he does politicking very well. He knows his audience, and he knows how to use the media to get what he wants, and often that's just attention.
So a couple of questions also are asking about kind of your experiences on the trail and how they might be similar or different to other kinds of election dynamics. And so, for example, there was a question about the 2000 race and perceptions of, despite a strong economy, Clinton being perceived as President Clinton being perceived as a drag on Vice President Gore. Similar kind of perceptions on the trail that you saw this time, and how did you go about making sense of it all at the end of that whirlwind story you told of getting on the plane to go home, but then walking into the studio and making sense of it all when Biden dropped out of the race?
Say the question again. I apologize.
How much of a drag was Biden in what you've noticed on the trail, and how might it compare to prior elections where a VP is running and the president might be perceived as a problem? So, I'll stop there.
I mean, how much of a drag was Biden on Harris? I mean, it's hard. It's really, really hard to say. It's really hard to I know there's a lot of people blaming Biden. He didn't get out soon enough. If he had just got out sooner, things could have been different. They could have had a primary. I'm not really sure that would have changed much. I can certainly say when when Biden said the garbage comment about supporters or whatever he was trying to say, if he was trying to talk about specifically the comedian, the way it came out, I do not think that helped Harris. She had rhythm. Did that change the election? I don't think so. They were not together very much. Harris didn't do herself probably many favors in the sense that it was clear from the results of this election that voters were looking for change. Yes? She, I think she struggled with explaining what that change would be from the previous 3-4 years. She was tied to the Biden administration. She was his vice president, so of course she is. But she did struggle to articulate how things would be different. The interview on The View became almost infamous when she's like, what would you do differently? And she did not have, the clearest answer. I think that was something that she struggled with, whether it was talking about immigration or the economy.
This question is almost an example of some citizen reporting and getting your reaction to it. So one of our attendees went to get drinks at the Edgewater in Madison, where Harris campaign members stayed for their last rally before election night. And the campaign glitterati all around seemed very cavalier, comfortable, and confident. What were you hearing from insiders from the Harris campaign as the election was imminent?
Yeah, they were confident. My colleague, Tamara Keith, I wasn't with them like the last few days because I was with Trump. But one of the big points was how Harris earlier on kept talking about how they were the underdog. But towards the last couple of weeks, they kind of dropped that language, and they did seem more confident. And there was kind of like an energy. And there was a lot of, remember the Iowa poll that came out? Very respected pollster. There was certainly a feeling that she could win this among many. So I think, that was definitely something that was happening.
This is more about issues, and I'll preface the question that came from the audience with a note. A graduate student in the School of Journalism and Mass Communication named Jess Maki did this really interesting study that we wrote about in a local newspaper as kind of the preliminary results before writing up more formal stuff. And one thing that happened was we asked people, tell us the issues that you care about the most that government can engage with to make your life better. And they said reproductive rights, and they talked about the economy, but they also talked about fix the roads, help our local schools, improve healthcare in our local communities, a lot of local issues. What are the dynamics you see in an increasingly nationalized country with respect to how important local politics still are in elections, or if they are?
Oh yeah, I'm a big. I feel like all politics are local. How does it impact you in your household? I mean, I was talking last night with Lynn and the others about how when I think about like the challenges to democracy, one of the biggest challenges is the diminishing of local news, and people, I think she had said this, people trust their local reporter, but not necessarily the national reporter. And I think that's because of that distance that is there. But if you can touch people at home, you're going to have a greater impact. And I think what the student was reporting on, I think reflects that.
Question here about celebrity endorsements. And so, the question is really, do celebrity endorsements matter? And I'll expand it a bit to say, do they matter? We probably don't imagine someone walks into the voting booth and says, well, Beyonce is for her, me too. That's probably not what's happening in people's heads. But celebrities bring attention to candidates. They can communicate a candidate's authenticity. They can, in your example with George Clooney, maybe start to sow more public doubts about a candidate. So what are different ways besides, it changed a vote, can celebrity endorsements influence how campaigns operate?
Yeah, I don't know if I have like a great answer on that. I think my answer is it depends. It's kind of like the question to Bernard about, do rallies matter? Celebrity endorsements, obviously were not enough for Harris, and there was a lot of talk that some of the celebrity endorsements actually hurt her because it just kind of spoke to kind of like the elite. These are celebrities that their lifestyles and the places where they are were so far beyond where working class Americans were that you could hardly relate. The celebrities didn't know what working class people were going through. That was one of the some of the narratives that kind of came out about that. On the flip side, take the rallies. It didn't seem like the rallies necessarily helped Harris, but I feel the rallies absolutely helped Trump. And I think it depends on the candidate. I think it depends on the moment. For Trump, let's remember, Bernardo was also talking about Go TV, the get out the vote. That is the heart of campaigning for years and years and years and years. The grassroots, the knocking on doors. Trump kind of like did away with that in many ways. He's like, I will turn out the voters. He basically, turned to Turning Point to like do some knocking. They hired people to do some knocking on doors. But it wasn't like the Democrats who were going on knocking doors, getting like the culinary unions and getting them knocking. And Trump felt that he could turn out his supporters largely through rallies and TV. He went to Madison Square Garden. He went to Denver, Colorado. He went to Salem, Virginia. These are not battleground states. These are not states that he won. These are not states that anyone thought he would win. But it was part of a narrative. And I think that narrative helped him with his people.
Last question. So I often tell my students that democracy is for losers, and then I pause as they look at me quizzically, and then I say, because those who lose the election have another opportunity. There's another election for them to advance their views, to try to get their candidates elected. It's an ongoing process, and that's, ultimately who it's for. The last question from the audience, it says,
I like how you poke at people.
Yeah. It's fun. It's a post-tenure move, I suppose. A question from the audience says, please reassure me, will we ever have another election?
I I understand. Okay, it would take a lot of work to. I think you need like I'm not the expert on this, but it's not like he can just have the House and the Republicans in the House and Senate and say we're going to change the law and be able to change the Constitution in order to not have an election and just like so he can have a third term. It would also involve maybe someone back there can help me out. It's a lot more than just, it's like 3/4 or it's very high. Thank you for nodding your head. But it's also state legislatures. I mean, it'd be very significant. Is that possible? Man, there's so much has happened that I never thought would imagine. So that's my caveat. The other thing I'll say is I believe in U.S. institutions. I believe they're stronger than people give them credit for. Have they changed? Have they been impacted by certain politicians? Absolutely. But I still, and the experts that I speak to, the people that I respect, talk about the courts, talk about the systems. Yes, there are things that Trump has said, that he plans to attack the Department of Justice, that he plans to attack the FBI, and change these things. Are those things that are going to be watched very closely? 100%. But I also think that there are others. Will there be the same guardrails as there was in the first administration? No. But that doesn't mean there won't be any guardrails. There are, the U.S. system, there is a U.S. system that I think will take action if limits are pushed, and Trump has said very clearly that he plans to come in and disrupt. To what degree is that disruption? We'll find out, and we'll be reporting on it at NPR. NPR.org, please.
So we have On the Cutting Edge, the latest research supported by the ERC out at a poster session right now. Dr. Charles Franklin will be back in this room at 3:30 talking about polling from the 2024 Wisconsin elections. But for now, let us please join me in thanking Franco Ordoñez, National Public Radio, for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.